Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. The Middle East is in a state of limbo. Not all-out war, but definitely not peace yet, after the U.S. and Iran have failed to make any progress toward an agreement at their high-level negotiation sessions in Pakistan. This puts the 2-week ceasefire in the U.S. Israel-Iran conflict in danger of collapsing and the resumption of full-on war. Although poll after poll found overwhelming support for the war among the Israeli public, that consensus saw erosion over the 40 days of war and the growth of a full-on protest movement against it. My guest on the podcast today is Alon-Lee Green, the founding national co-director of Standing Together. That's Omdim Biyachad in Hebrew. Omdim Biyachad is a progressive grassroots movement established in 2015, and it mobilizes people around issues of peace, equality, and social justice. Joining the conversation is Haaretz correspondent Linda Diane, who has covered the protest movement, or should I say protest movements, over the past several years. Welcome, Alon and Linda.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Alison. Thank you.
Alon, you were among the leaders of the thousands of Israelis who gathered this week on Saturday night to protest the war in Habima Square. In this very uncertain time of temporary ceasefire of the Iran war, where the United States seems to be the deciding factor as to whether we are returning to our bomb shelters and our IDF forces return to attacking targets in Iran, what was the message of the protest?
First of all, let me suggest maybe we will not come back to the bomb shelters. I think it's a good idea. Don't let us go back to the bomb shelters. It's not that fun. We've been protesting for weeks now, since this war started, to say that this second Iran war, this fourth Lebanese war, this who knows how many Gaza war, it does not bring us any security. It brings us back to losing lives, to have destruction, to be dependent on governments of death here in Israel, in the U.S., people that feel very safe to throw nations, peoples, to a dangerous reality while they profit something and we all lose. We said that there is another way, a way of negotiations, of diplomatic agreements, that we know that yet another war will not achieve something that the previous war did not achieve. We tried to remind the Israeli public that just 8 months ago, we ended the first Iran war with the big promises of Netanyahu saying that we scored a historic win, that we annihilated the ballistic missile program of Iran, that we annihilated the nuclear threat of Iran. And then 8 months after this historic win that will stand for generation, quote unquote, the generation was very short, and now we needed to go to another war on the same issues. This is a strategic failure. This is a promise that cannot be fulfilled. So we try to gather Israelis from the Jewish and the Palestinian communities in our society to say, no, we do not believe we need to go to this war. And yes, there is another way.
So to simplify, during the fighting, your message was stop the fighting. And now that there's a ceasefire, you were saying don't go back to it.
Exactly. And we see that now people sit on the negotiation table. The leaders of all parties are negotiating. They did it before. And even more, there was an agreement already with Iran, an agreement that Netanyahu really pushed to throw to the garbage and convincing Donald Trump to go out of this deal. And then we got a threat again. And then there is an emergency. And then we must act. And then we must obey. And then we could not say anything because there's an emergency. And then the opposition is completely aligned with the government. And it's a reoccurring kind of reality that we're all just like exhausted of.
Unfortunately, the negotiations don't seem to be going too well at the moment.
That is true. Looking at what is being thrown in the news, saying that we will come back to the war, that we will put a siege, that they will throw rockets and missiles on us. This is something we should avoid. If it is possible to reach agreements that isolate those radical forces that are trying to push everyone into war, I think this is what we need to do. Unfortunately, the Israeli government is part of these radical forces.
Linda, you've covered protests against the judicial coup. You've covered protests for the release of the hostages and against the Netanyahu government in general, the end of the Gaza war, and now the end or the hope to not return to the war in Iran. So to paraphrase the Passover Seder, how was this protest? How is this round of Iran war season 2 protests different from those previous protests that you've covered?
In a lot of ways, I would say it is and it isn't. It's made up of a lot of the same organizations and a lot of the same groups, be they political parties, be they protest movements, be they human rights groups, who are leading and bringing people in. This time, as opposed to, say, the judicial overhaul protests and the return of the hostage protests, there's less of a one unified single message at the core. And although it should be, and it generally is, stop the war, we need peace, the different blocs that make up these protests have very different ideas of how that should be achieved and have had very different messaging over the course of this war. For instance, you had both the Hadash party and the Democrats party at the protest, whose leadership was saying very different things about the justness and rightness about going to war with Iran in the first place at the outset of the war. You also had at this particular protest a semi-separate breakaway protest that is slightly more radical, more by teenagers who identify with certain far-left and communist blocs, who are using more provocative language, doing things like calling pilots war criminals and saying, like, stop the genocide, who are having their chance and presenting their views at the same time as the main protest is going on just a few meters away. So there's a lot happening at once, but the fact that all these people are still coming in on Saturday nights, week after week, and that you can get all of these disparate groups to come in and protest together does show that there is still that same lingering discontent that brought us from the judicial overhaul through the post-October 7th protests, through the hostage protests and Gaza war protests to where we are now.
I agree. It's, I think that we worked quite hard to create a coalition here that brings both the peace and anti-occupation organizations and movement, which we identify as part of, and the protest movements that have been very active across the judicial overhaul and the post-October 7th protest. And I think being able to bring them and to create this wide coalition is a goal by itself, because we are at the face of a very, very dangerous moment. We're in the beginning of an election year. We are seeing the strengths of the government trying to also deny us with our democratic freedoms and using this emergency in order to silence us. And I think bringing this coalition together and standing together, standing in the middle of this coalition and holding both parts is a unique position to be able to influence Israelis that maybe started the war with a high percentage of support to the war, but this support have been declining very, very quickly. People are upset, people are frustrated, people feel tired and exhausted, and we see that in many various ways that people are expressing this unrest towards this war and the government. And I think connecting the issues into one protest that says enough, we deserve quite a different reality and normality and quiet and living without sending our sons and daughters to Lebanon in the fourth time to kill and get killed. I think this is an important message, and we need to find this point that allows all sides that you described to be together in one protest.
Your glass half full of the numbers of the protesters showing up are high, and that in the polls, the numbers of people supporting the war have dropped. Still, we're talking about a really solid majority of Israelis supporting this war. A poll just out by the INSS said that 61% of the public opposed the ceasefire. Only 29% supported the ceasefire. 73% believe that Israelis will need to resume fighting against Iran within the next year. And 69% support continuing the campaign against Hezbollah in Lebanon, regardless of the developments in the Iranian arena. So Are you not at all discouraged, not just by the determination of the Netanyahu government's desire to keep fighting, but their apparent support among the Israeli public with such a large percentage?
I'm actually encouraged to know that we made such a difference in 5 weeks, coming from 90% support into 61% supporting this war right now. This is a big change. This is a big drop in the support of Israelis to the war. We see that all across. Even the media is questioning the war and the objectives right now. It's delusional to believe that the promises that have been made to us at the beginning of the war are still valid somehow, and that we're still fighting to change the regime in Iran or to save Iranians while we're killing them and making them refugees. But I think a lot of people are waking up and joining this protest. But yes, when we have war in Israel, there is an overwhelming support to the war. And it took us a long, long time during the Gaza war, during this genocidal war in Gaza. It took us a long, long time to get the numbers that we have right now coming out and showing up against the war. It took us a long time to build the support for a ceasefire in Gaza. At the beginning, it was a one-digit number of support of people saying there is a deal on the table after October 7th. And it ended with 80% supporting our message and our goal eventually, even when people were asked, do you support what we're doing to the Palestinians in Gaza? We were having a lot of people saying, no, we don't agree. It took us a long time to get there, but I believe we can change reality.
You spoke of the danger of an election year. Speaking of danger, you had a little personal after party after the demonstration this week on Saturday night that caused you to spend most of today before you came here to the recording studio for the podcast at the police station. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, an hour after the protest, when I was already back at my apartment, a group of 15 thugs, right-wing, far right-wing activists, showed up at my doorstep, at my apartment, slamming the door, trying to break my house door, pushing it with their shoulder, trying to really knock it down. I needed to really hold the door from the other side. They were threatening, saying, open the door, you're a traitor, we'll kill you. It took the police more than 20 minutes to show up. They actually showed up exactly while these people left. They also poured an acidic kind of chemical on my door that really smelled very terrible, and the smell is still there in the staircase. And that felt quite threatening. It's the second time these people are coming to my home in the last 2 weeks.
They're led by this activist that's become infamous for stalking people personally, Mordechai David, right?
Yes, he came in the first time. Just less than a week ago, I got from the court restraining order from him. He's not allowed to get 50 meters from my home and 25 meters from me. So I guess he needed to send other people to come. And this time they came with their face covered and much more violent than the last time.
Do you feel like you need some level of personal protection at this point?
The movement Standing Together is providing a level of protection in the means we can. For a long time now, we needed to work with private security because the police tells us there's nothing we can do. We don't believe that there's nothing that the police can do. I'm kind of sure that they have the technology to do something if they would choose to do something. Today, I asked the police, okay, what should I do? And they said, we cannot give you any advices. It's on you.
Speaking of the police and whether or not they're actually capable of doing something when they want to, just last week at the protest, they made sure to address your presence there by arresting you. Can you talk about what happened with that and what happened a bit in the aftermath?
Yeah, it's been quite some weeks, actually, that the police have been dispersing us in a violent and aggressive way. The first time it was 11 people arrested in Tel Aviv, another 4 in Haifa. This time, last week, it was 17 people arrested in Tel Aviv, including myself. And it was as if they just pointed on me and took me from the crowd, 4 police officers. While they were doing it, 2 police officers were holding my hands behind my back, and one other one held my neck, put his face 1 centimeter from my face, and shouted at me for at least a minute, I will do to you whatever I want, and you will not resist. I will do to you whatever I want, and you will not resist. and we had no distance between his face and my face. I could feel him. That was very extreme. Then they put us in the police car, and there was a pre-alarm, this thing that our phones are making a sound, and we need to understand that there is a minute, 2, maybe 3 to go and find a shelter. We told the police officers, we're on a bus. It's dangerous. Allow us to go to the shelter. We are above the largest bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. And they said, you chose to come to our protest. It's your problem. Only when the alarm was sounded and it was already almost off, they put us in a lobby of a building full of glass. Wasn't the correct way to treat us. And yeah, they weren't there to protect us. And I do connect it, by the way. I think the police is one arm of persecuting us, and these right-wing, far right-wing thugs is the second arm, but it's of the same body. It is an attempt to make us feel that there is a price to pay for speaking up, for showing up, for saying what we're saying. And I do think it's just an example or maybe a study case for them to see how they can operate during the elections.
This isn't your first rodeo. You've been to other protests, demonstrations. You've been arrested before. Do you feel a change, an evolution in how the police are behaving towards you?
I think that it was always obvious that you could find those people in the police that are reasonable, that you can work with. Some of them are still there, but it's becoming a small minority of people that you can work with, that you can call and get some help. And most of the people that come and deal with you in these protests are violent, and you feel that they are there to also take out some of aggression, and that they get the orders that are not, the right approach of a very professional police that is thinking of the situation and saying this is what needs to be done. No, they decided there needs to be arrests because Ben Gvir said, please provide some arrest, and then they acted. It took more time to disperse us from Habima with the aggression and violence than we would leave ourselves after the demonstration is done. If the excuse was our safety, I think we would be safer not being arrested, not being violently treated, and everyone would be home.
Presumably part of the excuse was the fact that you're not supposed to have large gatherings in Tel Aviv when Tel Aviv is under missile fire, and there was a whole court debate after that and a discussion. Do you think it's wrong to limit demonstration size when there's a war on and missiles are falling?
I think it's wrong. I think you cannot use a war as an excuse not to protest a war. If this will be a valid excuse, we will never protest because Israel is in a constant war. This is actually the policy of Israel, a forever war. We are just coming back to the same fronts again and again and again. It's not stopping. And I do think that we are able to be responsible enough to choose where we conduct our protests next to bomb shelters, next to safe spaces. We had professional people coming and looking at the different places in Israel, also providing a professional opinion on how quick we can get into the safe space in terms of how many we are in Habima. So if we are in Habima, even 5,000 people, we can get into the safe space to the bomb shelter within 2 minutes.
A larger question about your organization, about standing together. More than a decade ago, you founded it. Today, I think it's arguably the most visible standing organization, resistance movement, and it's the only one that seems to be really attracting a younger generation. You go to many of the protests, and it all seems to be, much older people. Why do you think it's succeeding? What you have to offer is speaking to the Israeli public, and also just how it's changed over the years. Your cornerstone was shared society between Jewish and Palestinian Israelis, and you were sort of focused kind of away from the security, political issues, more to the social issues, social justice issues, fight against the occupation, and now you've had to adjust with the times. Where do you think the organization has come from, and where do you think it's going?
So it actually started around the Gaza war of 2014 and the aftermath of the Intifada and the knifing events in Jerusalem in 2015. So the question of the occupation and the conflict and the violence, it was always there, and we did try to build a platform that is joined for both Palestinians and Jews that are citizens of Israel. It was a journey. It was definitely a journey. I think that growing as a movement, understanding what does it actually mean to organize people, How do you build leaderships? How do you multiply? You start with a group of 50 people founding the movement, but then you create a DNA that you want that thousands will have. How do you do that? How do you grow the leadership? How do you build more chapters across the country? And we found out that one of the best things that we can offer people is not being more of the same. And I think this is what also attracts the young people. Also in the Palestinian community, by the way, it's not only the big protests in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or Haifa where you see that the older generation goes with the judicial overhaul and the pro-democracy movements, and standing together is a more younger kind of movement. But also in the Palestinian community, I think we're not more of the same. And seeing that, for example, standing together is full of women Palestinian leaders that are very strong figures in the Palestinian society is very inspirational. And I think it's different than the very established political infrastructures and movements and political parties in the Palestinian society. So I do believe that maybe looking at a generation that grew up after the 90s, not hearing the word peace, not seeing our leaders even looking at the direction of negotiations, of changing reality. You know, Netanyahu came back to power in 2009, and one of his most famous sentences after coming back is, he said, if you expect that something will be different, don't expect. We will always live on our sword. We will always have a conflict. And I think it breaks us as Israelis, as a young generation. We try to picture our future here in Israel. We try to picture that maybe we will also have children here. It's impossible. It really is impossible. And I think having an alternative picture of peace and equality and social justice, not only being in resistance all the time, but using also hope of being Jews and Palestinians together in one movement, in one room, after October 7th, crying together and maybe arguing together and maybe imagining together and then leaving this room to do something outside together. It's actually very radical in Israel, but it is also providing a very hopeful picture for what this place can be.
You weathered some rough times during the Gaza war. There were people who were resisting your food drive to help Gazans. It was viewed as normalization. The BDS movement, or some elements of the BDS movement, called for you to be boycotted. You had some people boycotting or protesting some of your appearances on campuses and other places internationally. People were saying in the far left internationally that your coexistence narrative isn't legitimate when free expression in the Israeli Arab community is repressed, that you are allowed to protest, and then in the Arab cities when the Arab organizations want to protest, that they're repressed. So you don't feel like this has damaged the level of partnership and participation by Palestinian citizens of Israel in standing together?
Simply, the answer is no, because this, for example, the BDS statement was never even translated into Arabic. It was only in English. It wasn't translated into Hebrew. So I'm not sure people in the land, in Israel or Palestine or Palestinian citizens of Israel, they didn't read this statement. It didn't affect our work here in Israel. It did affect our work and appearances mainly in the U.S. or Western Europe, in which sometimes it's very funny, but a leader like Rula Daoud or Sali Abed, two amazing Palestinian leaders, can come to a campus in the U.S. and a student named Jane or Ruth that maybe were born in Minnesota or in Dakota will come to them with the kafia, with the Palestinian scarf, and they will tell them, "You're not legitimate, I'm boycotting you." And then they will look at them and they'll say like, "Huh? Like, this is my grandfather's scarf." Like, I saw these live examples, and I think it does portray how problematic it is to be only living according to theories and very theorized political and academic discussions. I think the reality happens on the ground. And on the ground, when you try to recruit 400 trucks full of food and bring them to Gaza, you get attacked, of course. Not by the BDS, by real thugs from the right wing and the police that are trying to kill you or trying to block you or trying to make your life miserable. Those are the people we need to deal with. And the Palestinian community in Israel and the Palestinian community in Gaza were actually working together, and we were working together with us, because this is the only choice we have. These academic discussions, they do not exist on the ground. On the ground, there is the work itself, and it's very nice that someone will write a statement somewhere. We will continue doing the work.
You mentioned that you're optimistic in the way that people have changed their views about varying wars here, and the reality is we're living it. Are you similarly optimistic in the international sphere with how people perceive the conflict, especially as, an Israeli from an Israeli organization that is going to all of these places in the United States and in Europe and saying something very different from the narratives that people are more accustomed to hearing?
I do believe that the world and the politics in the world right now creates a lot of despair, and a lot of the phenomena and expressions of politics are actually a form of being despaired from politics and then moving into the side of expression rather than change or politics of change. And I think that if you are serious enough about changing the reality you're talking about or you're facing, that you need to also ask yourself, how are you going to do that? Not just ask yourself, how do I express my frustration with this reality? But I do understand the frustration, and I do understand these forms of being frustrated and just expressing very, very blunt politics that is just like cursing. And I do have the optimism that some forms of amazing movements and political parties and elections in the world are happening also on the other direction of tackling the far right. We see that in some countries in which the left can organize and can organize in a very good way, that they can unite a rather wide spectrums of coalitions and communities around their cause. And I do think these examples exist. And I do also believe that eventually people understand that maybe there is also the question of Israel and Palestine. And it's a very important question in the world politics right now. But there's also the question of what Trump is doing in the U.S. and what is happening to Europe and what is happening in the Middle East in other countries. And if they will not wake up and base their own politics on their own self-interest, then they will be in an academic discussion while politics will move on in their own societies. But their societies are paying a price as well. And this is what we're trying to say in Standing Together, also to these ideas of BDS and far-right theories that maybe miss the question of people. There are people, and a good kind of politics is not polarizing people against people, big groups in one side and other groups in one side, but it's actually saying we are all losing in very different ways. And we acknowledge the ways that are extremely different. But we are all losing from this reality, and we can all gain from achieving a new reality, which is better for all of us. I think this is a kind of politics that can harness a lot of the communities in the world.
Speaking of politics, I will wrap up this interview by asking your view on the upcoming elections, which will happen in the next year. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about their result? And in a very related question, your partner in Standing Together, Sally Abed, who you mentioned earlier, is now also a politician. She's on the Haifa City Council at the head of a joint Jewish-Arab list. Do you also contemplate entering real-time mainstream politics in order to enact the change you want, or are you going to stay in the lane of activism?
I do believe that we have the power to defeat Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and I do believe people in Israel are fed up with this reality. They don't want to keep on living in this terrible reality. I also believe that we have not only a problem of our existing coalition, but we also have a problem of our existing opposition. We're just after 6 weeks of this war. And in yesterday's demonstration in Abima, after the ceasefire, it was the first time that the Democrats Party, showed up in the rally. They were absent for 5 weeks because when there's war, you don't speak up against the war. This is the unwritten law in Israel about wars. I think we can expect for better opposition to the wars of Netanyahu and Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And I do believe that seeing people like Sally Abed and Itamar Avneri from Standing Together, that each ran in Haifa and Tel Aviv and became very successful council people in Haifa and Tel Aviv, I do believe that I want to see the purple people, people that hold the values of peace and equality and social justice and are connecting these struggles, translating this into electoral politics. I feel I would want to be involved in this kind of a project, but standing together will stay a grassroots movement. It is not a partisan movement, but I do believe there is a room for a new political party that will be really joint Jewish-Arab, that will be really for peace and equality, and will not support the war whenever there's a war.
And you're not tempted to found it or lead it?
I think there are a lot of projects and goals and things I can do, but I do need to decide where to put my focus because, changing reality through a social grassroots movement, I think it has a lot of power. I think most of the big changes in the world that we saw, granting the right to vote for women, the LGBTQ movement, those changes were really achieved by movements and not because of a political person, elected official waking up one day and saying, today is the day.
Well, we'll see what today and tomorrow will bring for all of us and for you, Alon. In the meantime, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Linda, thank you.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guest, Alon-Lee Green, to my colleague, Linda Diane, and to producer and editor, Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to our podcast and make sure you don't miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so inclined, leave a comment and a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.